Supreme Court is hearing arguments today on how far cities can go in preventing people from sleeping in public places. Said differently, for punishing people for being homeless. The case, City of Grants Pass, Oregon v. Johnson, examines whether the Eighth Amendment in the Constitution is being violated as cities ban and fine people for posting up in public spaces, including using blankets and cardboard for protection.
The case stems from ordinances in Oregon that prohibit people from camping on public property, while courts in western states have already ruled in favor of protecting unhoused people from fines and punishment if no other shelter is available. The Supreme Court, their ruling would have sweeping implications nationwide. Now, this case comes as homelessness across the country has reached record levels. The government says that on any night in 2023, there were 653,000 people sleeping on the street, which is up about 12% from the previous year.
Yeah, I remember that during the Bernie campaign, he used to cite the 500,000 homeless figure and also cite a not very large number of dollars that would take to actually resolve the crisis, much less than is routinely sent overseas to fight foreign wars, for example. But it doesn't seem to have been a national priority or a local priority in many places. And now this question has arisen as to whether or not the status of being homeless can be criminalized or at least get to cited with a civil fine if, in fact, you obviously don't have any money and there are no publicly provided beds available for you to go to. What do you make of this?
Well, look, I think it's a difficult situation. I don't have any desire to police the homeless more, to compound their difficulties with fines. I mean, that's not, a lot of them don't have money, and so giving them more interactions with the police, more fines, making them pay more, involving them in more legal matters, does not actually move them toward the position of being, of finding a place to stay. Far from it, it accomplishes the opposite. At the same time, so many of our cities, it's been a major problem, obviously on the West Coast. I saw a little bit of it in DC over the pandemic, of public spaces, public parks being taken over by tent cities, where there's a lot of then ugliness and unpleasantness and trash and waste and occasionally unsafe situations for the people staying there. And we can't allow all of our public parks to be taken over by tent cities. So it is a real problem. The solution is just to increase the supply of housing, which we could do if we got rid of a lot of zoning regulations and make it particularly impossible in California. I would rather see that as the strategy. Now, some of the homeless people, there's a difference, right? Some are homeless primarily because of economic hardship. Some are living on the streets because they are in such either mental illness, and obviously all of these things intersect, but they're having such mental health crises or such terrible drug addiction that they need to be where the drugs are being made available to them. Frankly, they couldn't stay in a even if you gave them a house, they wouldn't be able to stay in it, as we've found out in multiple municipalities. So it's a tough problem, and I'm okay with directing more public resources toward, if you want to call it a mental health help instead of police. Like, these people don't need to be jailed. Jailing is not helping, but some of them do need to be. They need mental health facilities made available to them, and those are interventions I'm perfectly comfortable with. But just letting, in all circumstances, homeless people colonize all of the green spaces in the city is not really a solution.
Yes, well, we've seen the rapid closure over the last few decades of mental health institutions for a number of reasons, including some scandals that were happening with poor treatment of people who are at these facilities, and also due to funding reasons. I'm reminding myself of what the budget line item was to end homelessness in America, at least according to the 2020 Bernie campaign. He had a proposal to guarantee housing as a human right and eliminate homelessness that would cost $2.5 trillion over the next decade, fully paid for by a wealth tax on the top 1/10 of 1%. That's people who have at least a net worth of $32 million. If you fractionally tax people who have $32 million, you could raise a total of $4.35 trillion, which is almost twice as much as you would need to end homelessness, according to this plan. So there are solutions afoot, but we don't seem to have very much of a political appetite for those kinds of wealth taxes, even though they're enormously popular among the public.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, it is the public that has to bear the responsibility of what's going on with the homeless population. Now, you say we can't let people take over public parks. They are, in fact, public parks, and homeless people are members of the public. And if you want to incentivize different kinds of behaviors that preserve public spaces for their intended use, then you have to be willing to invest in this population the same way that you would invest in tax breaks for people who are buying homes, or child care tax breaks, or any of the other kinds of incentives that we've created in society.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism of this is a furious debate that takes place in among activists for how to, or thinkers, people who are trying to solve homelessness, what to do about it. The criticism of the housing first strategy is that, like I said, there are some people who've looked at this problem and think that even making housing available, just by paying for it, just here, we've paid for a unit, an apartment, a house, whatever it is, a bed for you, it doesn't work. It works for some of them. It doesn't work for the entire homeless population because some of them have such drug addiction problems and mental health problems that making housing available they're not capable of staying in that housing until you address those things. Now, obviously, not having a house makes those problems worse, so it's not. I think it's not very clear or very obvious. But for some of the homeless, addressing the mental health issues and the drug dependency is some advocates say that is the primary, the first step to do. Obviously, it takes money either way.
Speaking of drug dependency, some precedent for this court case that may give some insight into where the Supreme Court will go with this involves people who are addicted to narcotics. This is from a Harvard Law write-up analyzing what's likely to happen here. They say that in 1962, the Supreme Court applied this Eighth Amendment analysis to a case called Robinson v. California. In that case, the court struck down a California law that made it illegal to be addicted to narcotics, and the court held that the law violated the Eighth Amendment because it didn't punish conduct, it punished a status of being, saying, quote, it was instead a status crime punishing someone for merely having an addiction in the state of California. And it will be interesting to see if homelessness is similarly characterized as a state of being as opposed to an actual act.
Right, and I don't think that should be criminalized. Frankly, I obviously don't think drug use and addiction should be criminalized. I'm a libertarian. I'm fine with people using drugs, again, on their own property and within their own home or in somewhere where it is permitted. I recognize the harm to those people and to the public for just blanketly making it permissible in the public spaces of a city, which is engendering frankly, I think a blowback against the desire to legalize more drugs or even to legalize pot. I hear from everyone now. Everyone's complaining about the stench of it everywhere in every city, which I've never really encountered and I don't care that much, but we have to have some basic public order over the parks of the city, in my view.
I mean, I'm only resisting to the we have to thing. That what we have to do is respect the basic human rights and interests of everybody in the community. And if that means allowing people to sleep in the parks, well, then you have to figure out some other mechanism to incentivize people not to sleep in the public parks. If you want there to be no public parks and you want to privatize every inch of where we live, that is an option with obvious downfalls that I think people will object to. But this is what it means to live in a community. So what does it mean to provide for various communities who have different needs, as you've, I think, articulated very well here? I mean, one of the arguments that have been made when we're talking about Skid Row and some of these other places on the West Coast is that folks, even when housing is provided for them, want to be near the source of their narcotics. I could articulate some alternatives to that, but given how people have reacted to even needle exchange programs as facilitating drug use, I can very easily imagine what kind of reaction you get to saying allow people to live where they want to live and make their narcotics more available to them, or the kind of drugs that help people to wean themselves off narcotics. And there's a bigger question here about why addiction is running so rampant, what the downstream effects of the opioid crisis have been, whether or not the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture these drugs legally will have to answer for the role that they've played in addiction, and on and on and on down the line. This is a substantial public policy question, but I don't want the addiction part of this to ignore how many tens and hundreds of thousands of Americans who are not mentally ill or addicted to drugs still face homelessness simply because of poverty. How many college students live in their cars because of poverty? How many Americans at some point or another in their lives have had the experience of living in their car or having to couch surf on their friends or families, which is also a form of homelessness, even though it's not the kind of street homelessness that is being focused on in the Supreme Court case.
I agree on that, and we have artificially constrained the supply of available housing by government fiat for absolutely no reason, particularly in some of the places worst hit by this epidemic of homelessness, of people sleeping on the streets. It's not entirely mental illness. I'm not saying it's entirely drug addiction.
Yeah.
California, it's more expensive to live there than anywhere else throughout the state because there is again, government mandated artificial constraint on the supply of available housing it has spillover effects throughout the rest of the economy and is so bad for our country and need not exist.
Yeah, not to be a Bernie bro about it, but part of his plan, to your point, was to devote $70 billion to repair and build new public housing. Think about all the money that's going out the door for other kinds of international priorities. Given what's happening here at home, I think that's a good reason why so many folks are upset domestically.
That does it for us for today. Tomorrow we will be back with more great content, another episode of our show, some interviews, some news. We don't know what's going to happen yet, but
maybe
we're
your
paying
voice
attention.
will be back, Robby.
We'll see if I'll be here tomorrow. You're going to be
saying-
doing the show with like a Robby dummy or something.
Just like everything.
Oh, shush.
You set yourself up.
Shush.
You set yourself up.
Shush.
Okay. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
It'll be the Briahna show tomorrow. Oh, goody.
I hope
Bye-bye.
you're feeling better. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.